This is Jordan Poyer, safety for the Buffalo Bills, and you are now listening to Cover One Buffalo Podcast. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo Podcast. You are joining your normal host, Greg Thompson, along with a special guest tonight. We will be joined by founder of Spotrac.com, Mike Ginnitti. Mike, how we doing?
Excellent. Thanks for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to have you on. And a lot of the folks who listen to here know I lean towards the financial side of things a lot and get excited about that world. So as we had a little bit of a longer break here from the Thursday game, we thought it'd be exciting to be able to take a look at maybe a little more forward-looking things. And obviously your connection with creating, one of the most popular financial analysis sites in all of sports obviously has a connection. But maybe some things that a few fans don't know is that you actually are connected directly to the Bills in the Buffalo area, and that's where your home base is, and went to college, and some of your background there. So tell the fans a little bit about what you guys have going on at Spotrac, and maybe a little of your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm born and raised in Angola, New York. Currently reside in Orchard Park, New York. I lived in New York City for a little bit, so I got out of here for a few years. But I went to UB for all 6 years of my education, and my partner in crime, Scott Allen, who happens to be my cousin as well, grew up in Angola with me. He now lives in Virginia. So we've got sort of the DC side of it, and then I'm still local in Buffalo. But we've both been running this thing for 15 years now, and we really haven't had to move too far for it. It's been nice. Got a couple of nice local connections. Now I've been on the John Murphy show a few times and things like that. So the Bills sort of know who I am a little bit, which is nice.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, it's like I said, it's just a small business here in Orchard Park, New York, that we have a couple of remote developers working off of. And other than that, we just kind of crank on the internet all day.
No, that's awesome, man. I know, like I said, kind of warming up here, I'm a fanatic about the site, and I'm on there playing around all the time. One of your premium members, kind of playing around with where the numbers come in. And obviously it's, in the past, we've always been going through the idea of Bills fans are always kind of bracing themselves about, okay, which guy can we afford to cut to be able to create the cap space that we need, and who's the lesser of evils, and where we can afford to get rid of guys. And we're kind of in a nice luxury position now that Brandon Beane took some of the medicine that we needed to take 2 years ago now and got through there, and now put the team into a better position to be able to have the flexibility going forward. And we're almost in a weird spot that you're kind of like a kid who gets a new job and has money for the first time, but some bills are going to be coming up down the line. And I'm curious to see, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I didn't anticipate as many signings as we had this spring. And certainly I don't know anyone who was projecting 18 and 20 unrestricted free agents. But maybe some of your thoughts on how he approached that, and then maybe some of the thoughts on what we might expect going into this spring.
If I could ask Brandon Beane one question, I would ask him, honestly, how much of this process he thought out in his interview. When the Bills sat him down and said, why are you our guy? I want to know exactly if this is what he had in mind, because it's methodical. Everything he's done has been ridiculously calculated, and that's why it's successful. I mean, you can't just kind of throw baloney at the wall doing this thing, especially in a situation that he came into, which was cap hell. Yep. I mean, he did not come into a situation that, John Lynch came into in San Francisco, for instance, right? John Lynch sort of had house money to work with, and, oh, by the way, was able to trade for his quarterback. That's not common. So what Brandon Beane came into is the more common approach, which is get us out of the mess and then, make us a contender. He's done it in 2.5 years. So my thinking is with Brandon Beane, and I've given him a lot of credit on my podcast and on some shows that I've been on as well, is this has been his plan all along, that he knew that Marcel Darius' contract was one of the worst in team history, and that had to go. And it's incredible that he was able to get it out of here in a trade. It's incredible that he was able to do that. That was really step one of this thing all working as quickly as it did, because I don't think, I can tell you right now, I didn't think it was tradable. I didn't think there was any team that was going to take that off of his hands. And the fact that happened in season, and it wasn't even an off season, so he knew it was coming before the off season. The fact that happened started this whole process. I gave him credit for doing this in the approach that he did it positionally, because a lot of teams are doing that incorrectly. For instance, you're going to have a situation in Miami where they're probably going to draft a quarterback in 2020, this upcoming draft. They have no offensive line, right? They have no secondary because they traded their best cornerback in Minkah Fitzpatrick. they're going backwards. They're doing the opposite approach that the Bills took, and the Bills have shown this is the way to do it. This is the successful way to do it. Start with the offensive line, build yourself a secondary, right, outside in. Then from there, you can probably get your quarterback and slow play that quarterback in, which, you can say that Josh Allen wasn't the optimal choice of that draft, but he's been good enough, that's for sure. So I give him credit for the approach, the process from day one. Like you said, getting out of the mess, taking on $70 million of dead cap. I'm with you. I'm going to make the point you made is they went big in free agency this offseason, which this was the year to do it. This was the right time to sign. I didn't think they'd sign as much as they did, but you have to remember this. There was a monkey wrench in this whole process. Nobody saw Eric Wood coming. And nobody saw, well, some of us may have seen Richie Incognito coming.
Not that quickly, yeah.
But I mentioned how you went offensive line, then quarterback, which is the right way to do it. They lost half that offensive line a year later, which nobody anticipated that. And that had to put pause to this whole process. So you've got to give him the most credit. It is the most impressive thing he's done, that he has rebuilt that offensive line on the fly amidst Josh Allen's sort of birth here, right? That's not common. That is not an easy thing to do. That's where teams die right there, is the offensive line isn't able to keep a young quarterback up. It's happened. And acquiring Dion Dawkins when he did, who was a guard, by the way, that just happened to work out to be a tackle, that's all fool's gold. This all sort of happened quickly because that all came together at the right time. Not to mention you finished your secondary with getting Tre'Davious White and Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde at the same time. So to me, that's where it all became successful quickly. The free agent splash happened this year, and this was supposed to be the transition year. This was supposed to be the year where Allen takes a step forward, these new free agents come in, the system sort of modulates a little bit, and then next year was the go year. It's all happening a year early, and I think it's because of the schedule, right? I think they're falling into this because of the schedule, and a few teams that were supposed to be decent aren't, and now we're 9 wins in and looking good.
Well, and I think it's interesting. You touched on the 2 points with the secondary and the offensive line. I agree completely in just the direction that football's going. And I think that you can see even beyond there, the results that we're seeing now, it wasn't an accident, because you're also talking about we didn't get any production out of EJ Gaines. We have the luxury of choosing Levi Wallace or Kevin Johnson. We ended up stumbling through the combination of how many teams could afford to lose Jeremiah Soros, Adrian Waddle, and Ty Nsekhe. And that if he hadn't have built with the depth that he did, bringing in that many pieces, in years past, these are injuries that would have completely destroyed the season, and it would have fallen apart, and we would have been, putting in Band-Aids like we've seen so many times over the past 20 years. But he thought ahead, gave us the cushion to be able to do that, to be able to release people, to be able to put people on injured reserve and still have a functioning unit on both sides of there. I think it really speaks to how much you valued those two units as a whole.
Another key point that I actually forgot to mention here is while he was ripping it down, right? He was ripping down the pieces that were dead weight for sure, right? You were piling up, like I said, 70 million of dead cap at that one point. He's also in the mindset of who's not going to be helping me in 2 years. And one of those players was Cordy Glenn. And that couldn't have been easy to do. Trading your starting Pro Bowl left tackle, who was, yes, injury prone. And oh, by the way, he did the same thing with Sammy Watkins. I'm not going to pay that guy in 2 years anyway. So now's the time to get rid of him, because now's not the time to hang on and fall in love with people. Now's the time to rip the Band-Aid completely off. And if they're not going to be here in 2 years, and if they're not going to be worth what I'm supposed to pay them in 2 years, they're gone now. That's not an easy thing to do, because that really destroyed the fan base for a good 6 to 8 months. If you remember, there was a lot of bad blood with what he was doing, especially when you moved guys like Watkins, who you had given up so much draft capital to go and get. And that wasn't on him, obviously, but that's hard to do while you're ripping it all down, while you're sort of tanking for that quarterback, to also look at the other big positions on your team, the left tackle, the wide receiver, and really say, they're not going to work for us in 2 years, so they shouldn't work for us now. That's a tough sell for a lot of front offices, especially for a new front office. And that's a big part of this right now. And oh, by the way, trading Tyrod Taylor as well.
Yeah, well, and just like you said, seeing that our choice is ride it out to get short-term value when we know we're not going to get anything long-term, but having the discipline to get value for it in the short term when they're not part of the long-term picture. Like you said, the majority of teams don't do that because they're worried about, protecting their job that year, or they're just thinking about, a lot of people lie to themselves and tell them, hey, no, we're going to be able to make this work. It's going to come together. And, having the discipline to do that, I think is really impressive. Yeah.
You mentioned the depth. That's part of it. That's sort of the prelude to the conversation I just had there was, we don't need a superstar right now. They weren't in the position to have any superstars at any position, honestly. They needed 3 or 4 guys that could handle the role, and hopefully one of them projected into the number one, right? You wanted a number one wide receiver. I'm not sure they've gotten there yet. You've certainly got something strong in Devin Singletary here, and that was able to let you move on from LaShawn McCoy later than I wanted them to, but they did it finally. Yeah. And if you go across all the positions, I mean, Lorenzo Alexander for 4 years, that's ridiculous. That's lightning in a bottle. Most teams are paying $20 million at that spot right now, and we're paying $2.5 million. So the Bills, and to his credit, like I said, I would love to sit down with him and say, what was calculated right up front? Was Sammy Watkins traded the day you were hired? I wonder if that was true, because I wonder if there was a laundry list of players that just weren't in his 3-year process, and he already had the writing on the wall. It just had to get the job done. So I give him credit. He has, like I said, there's certainly been a process, and the process, correctly to your point, was let's get rid of anybody who's overpaid and not going to be here in 2 years, and let's put 3 and 4 guys at each position. Hopefully we get some of them to work out. They have. And I hate to say it on a Bills podcast, but it's the Patriots way. This is what the Patriots have done for a decade. They have decided that no one person is worth more than anyone else, and that 3 are better than 1.
No, I think it's really smart, and that'll come up exactly in one of the players that we'll have coming up here in a moment. But I think this is a good kind of transition to get into kind of preparing some of our fans for what we're coming into now, where we had this interim period. There was kind of the purge of getting rid of the guys who weren't part of the long-term plan, letting the younger guys get the reps. Now having an offseason where we brought in the most unrestricted free agents in the league, many of them on 1 and 2 year deals. So some of those will come up here in a moment on guys we need to choose whether to re-sign, but also all those young players who have gotten reps for the 2 years leading up and now into this 3rd year. Many of them next year are going to be coming up into their final walk year in the contracts, where we may get into some extension talk. So it's going to be some choices where I think fans are going to see, 85 million, 91 million, whatever the projection is. I think you guys have it at 90.9 million right now. In that, and they're going to rattle off all the names of people they want to go sign. And that, don't get me wrong, there may be a couple signings, but I also think that with the methodical approach, and like you talked about, having that plan ahead of time, Brandon Beane's a guy who strikes me as probably a fan of the compensation pick formula. He seems like a guy who's going to have some of those things, out there. I wouldn't be shocked if we hear a press conference after the season about, hey, we're not planning on getting ahead of ourselves in free agency here. We're going to look at protecting our own. Before we get into player by player, do you think that's closer to what you expect, or do you expect maybe a mix with a few splurges of signings coming up?
I think it depends how much other teams are willing to give up. So I've started a roster bubble list like I start every year. Players that I think might fall off rosters this year for cap casualties, or whatever it might be, trade block guys. If a couple of big names hit there, I think Beane can pounce, because in my opinion, and I would venture to guess that it's his opinion too, this is a year early. I think everything's happening 1 year quicker than he thought it was going to hit. So he's probably willing to go a little. I mean, yes, he's got 80-some million to work with, and that's even after the draft picks. So he does have the capital to go and splurge if that 1 or 2, players that he's identified become available. I've looked at the free agent list, a ton already for 2020. I don't know. No one really pops on there.
It's not crazy.
It's not great. No. So do I think they're going to go and get a guy like Jadeveon Clowney if he becomes available? I don't know. I don't know that that's the kind of thing that the roster Beane's built will benefit from. That splashy, big brand guy who, can take attention away, but isn't going to have the production to the money ever. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney's never going to put up $22 million worth of production. It's not going to happen. But that's what's going to take in free agency to get a pass rusher right now. So I'm not sure Beane thinks anybody is worth a splash right now in free agency, because he has proven he doesn't need to do it. He can probably draft himself into 2 more starting roles. you're right about the compensatory draft picks. He's going to let 2 or 3 players walk that we probably don't want to walk, because he knows that in 2 years he can benefit from that. Now, that's a system that has to go away. I've said that many times to people.
It is a weird incentive.
Look, that existed because teams didn't have cap space. Everybody's got cap space now.
Yeah.
We've got half the league with $50 million to work with next year. They don't need additional help. So it's at this point, it's just a loophole that the good teams are using. So while it's here, Beane should use it. For sure. He should use it because he can replace the guys he's going to let walk, fairly easily, assuming he can stay on this hot run that he's on with the signings and the draft picks. And really, that's the other side of this. He did sign 18 players. He did make the splash from a quantity standpoint, but none of these contracts scare me. Mitch Morse's is up there. It's the highest center in the league, but it won't be for long. And if he weren't injured, we'd love him. We would love the guy. I mean, he would. Like I said, you had to replace Eric Wood after not realizing you needed to do that. You had already paid Eric Wood. You thought he was going to be your guy for the next 4 or 5 years, and then that came out of nowhere. So that was a reactionary move, but a good one. You certainly can't screw around with a starting center right now with a young quarterback. So that was the only contract to me that was out of reach, and he had to do it. So I give him credit for that. But John Brown is not scary. Cole Beasley's not scary. I think they probably move on from Tyler Kroft this year. To me, that was a miss. And here's why. It's not because it was a bad contract. It's an okay contract. They can get out of it. It's a fine contract. They had a gangbuster draft.
Yeah.
He has had back-to-back gangbuster drafts. I mean, it goes back to, like I said, where they started with the defense. They've got maybe 3 tight ends right now that a lot of teams would do well with. So I think you can get rid of a couple of players right now, even guys you signed last year. It's not going to damage it too much. And then you can go and fill those pieces with above average, but not blockbuster free agent deals.
Yeah, the only 2 guys that I had put out there that I could see that have any financial impact is, like you said, Tyler Kroft. I think it's 1.7, 1.8 to get out of. You get $5 million in savings, and that was kind of the going rate for that mid-tier tight end 2. It's the same thing that you got for CJ Uzoma. It's the same thing that you got for all the other guys that were out there. It just was kind of that going rate for Jesse James, and it was the same thing for Nick Boyle, and they all signed the same 3-year, $18 million deal. So whether we decide that, hey, we have the money to be able to ride that out because that's just kind of what the going rate for a tight end 2 is, or if they hit, I mean, obviously when you say that, everyone's thinking of Dawson Knox. If we decide Tommy Sweeney can be a number 2 tight end, maybe you stumble into that and we end up paying less than $1 million for both our tight ends next year. It gives us that luxury to do that. The other name that was out there is maybe Trent Murphy, and I'll let you talk me off the ledge. The only splurge that I've had my eyes on is I really want Nick Foles to make it, that Yannick Ngakoue makes it to free agency. Yeah. He's 25 years old, squeaky clean health. He's the one guy that I would splurge on to be able to do it. And if we could walk away from Trent Murphy and that Foles mess makes it that they can't afford to franchise Yannick Ngakoue, he's the one guy that I would maybe try to go after.
It's really interesting. You're right. That's a name that could hit, and I think there'll be a lot of teams in on that because he's got less miles too, based on the last couple of years in Jacksonville. Jacksonville's going to have to blow it up. I think Doug Marone's out of there. Yeah, I think they're going to fire Marone. I think they will move on from Foles, which is going to drop them with about $21 million of dead cap next year. So they're going to be right up against it without doing anything. So can they afford a franchise tag? Probably not. They probably can't even afford to tag him at this point unless they maneuver a couple of things. Obviously, Darius is going to fall off that roster and a couple of things like that. But yeah, that's probably your best case scenario from a pass rushing standpoint. I don't think do you think Clowney leaves Seattle?
I've been torn. So I believe strongly that they wouldn't have leveraged that agreement not to franchise him if he wasn't going to go into free agency. And I think that if Seattle matches what the highest offer is, he'll stay. I don't think he's going to give any discount. I think he wants the highest deal. I think he's been waiting for this, and I think he's going to go after there. If they're in the ballpark, I think he's enjoyed his time there. But I don't think he's going to give them any discount to stay.
Let me give you one more name that has been loosely mentioned, and it's because it's a similar situation to Jacksonville, and that's Kansas City and Dee Ford. Yeah. Kansas City's got to rebuild that defense, clearly, obviously, and Patrick Mahomes may be demanding a contract this offseason. If those two things happen, you're going to have to lose a player or two. They're definitely going to lose Watkins. Watkins is going to fall off that roster from a cap standpoint. But if they can't afford Dee Ford and that big contract they just gave him, which does kick in second year, teams will be calling, and I think the Bills will be calling on that one too.
I'd love to sneak in on one of those because you obviously know the benefit of taking advantage of trading for somebody else's bad contract rather than giving out a bad contract. So
you pay the signing bonus and we'll take
if you could sneak into one of those where, hey, you guys want to re-sign Chris Jones and give him a bunch of money, we'd be happy to take D Ford off your hands.
That's right.
One of those kind of Frank Clark, one of those kind of situations, I think it'd be interesting to be able to snag one of those if they could maneuver their way into it. And before we get too far down the path of the other players, there's a lot of names here in Buffalo that I think fans are curious about. And I had rattled off that some of the one-year guys or some of the guys coming up, I expect them to re-sign. I think that they IR'd Lader and Waddle when they did a injury settlement with everybody else. So I expect him back on a similar number. I could see them giving Corey Lugitt the same number they gave Jordan Phillips to come back in that ballpark. I'd like them to bring back Quentin Spain and Kevin Johnson. I think they're both going to be in a reasonable area to bring back. So I know I had kind of thrown out maybe around $5 million-ish, $6 million-ish would seem about right for them to get some respect for the work they've done, but not, really break the market. The two players that most fans are really curious about are the guys who have played really well and that I think have maybe priced themselves out and would be a couple of guys on that comp pick formula, and that's Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson. I thought Jordan Phillips might have pushed himself even up above $10 million into the $11 million range. Is that crazy, or is that are sacks flashy enough that somebody's going to throw a big bag of money at him?
That's a good question. I'm down on defensive tackles right now. If you want to put him on the edge, then he's probably worth that money. I think he walks because somebody gives him stupid money. Yeah. Is that what you're saying as well?
Yeah, correct. Yes. I think that Brandon Beane's going to have his number. Yeah, Beane's going to have his number, and his agent's going to come back, and they're going to say, hey, we got 3 years, $33 million from Arizona, and Beane's going to say, God bless you. Yeah, have fun.
Yeah, it's teams like the Redskins and the Cardinals and the Falcons that need to rebuild that defensive line. They're going to be reckless with those kind of players. And certainly the Bills can afford to be reckless. They shouldn't want to be. They shouldn't have to be, because quite frankly, they drafted Ed Oliver in a spot where they didn't need Ed Oliver. So they've already got some house money on that defensive line right now, in my opinion. They should be spending their capital and overspending their capital on an edge rusher. Not just to complement Jerry Hughes, but to replace him eventually too.
Oh, well, you look at the combination. I think you could have a defensive tackle rotation without adding anyone next year. Right. Harrison Phillips comes back. Star Latuile is not a good value, but he's a good football player. Yeah. He's going to be here anyways. There's no financial benefit of releasing him until you get into 2021. Like I said, I think Corey Lugitt is a perfectly fine DT4, and then Ed Oliver is now coming into his own. You're fine there. You look at defensive end. One, if we don't re-sign Shaq Lawson, Trent Murphy hasn't lived up to it and is the same idea as Star Latuile. He's not a good value, but there is financial benefit of potentially moving on. Jerry Hughes is good. He's still good, but he's 31 and he's certainly past his peak. Yeah, I want our first round pick and our biggest free agent signing to both be edge rushers. But that's certainly where I'm at. What are you thinking for Shaq Lawson? I had thrown out maybe 4 years, $36 million, around $9 million a year. And again, I think that's a little bit higher than Beane's going to want to go. And if he gets that number, I expect it to be outside of Buffalo. If it's south of there, maybe he stays. Shaq
Lawson has draft clout, which scares me because those guys get paid recklessly in free agency generally. If I had to guess, it'd be one or the other between Trent Murphy and Shaq Lawson staying. And for this reason only, the Bills have the luxury. You sort of preface this. They don't really have to do anything. I mean, we can talk about these players that need, extensions and they're small one and doneers kind of guys, but the Bills really don't have to make any kind of splash this offseason. You're right. He could get in front of a podium and say, coming off a solid season, don't want to shake, rattle things up too much. We're just going to kind of move forward with the process and see what happens. I think a little fluidity would be smart. I think shaking it up a little bit on the defensive side of the ball, because it's been pretty consistent now for 2.5, 3 years. I think you have to bring in somebody new just to shake things up and get younger and a little bit, cheaper if you have to. I don't want to pay Shaq Lawson $9 million if I can draft somebody for 4 years and 10. So
I brought up the same thing. Fans were talking about, re-sign Jordan Phillips. I said, no. Go find the next disgruntled, talented, misused guy from a team that you can pick up on waivers cheaply and find the next Jordan Phillips. Don't give Jordan Phillips $30 million. Go find the next one.
Yes, no question. Yeah, that's what I mean about the defensive line right there, is that you're finding them to be somewhat on the running back path. Yeah. They're replaceable, and if you're overpaying, you're a dinosaur right now.
Yeah, short term. You know, if we want to give somebody a contract for short, chunks of time, that's fine. But yeah, these long contracts just very rarely are working out in any of those where the explosive quickness is the
give me a guy who needs a prove it deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Well, and like you said, they're benefiting from the production of Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson's walk year because they set that up to be the case. They're benefiting from Quentin Spain and Kevin Johnson trying to earn a contract. Now, I don't mind that out of I think I counted 13 unrestricted free agents coming up here. Many of those are your Maurice Alexanders and your Julian Stanfords and pretty replacement level players. But out of some of the names we've talked about here, I don't mind if some of those guys earn being re-upped, but I think there's a benefit of building a team where you have a pocket of players trying to earn their next contract and they're going to ball out trying to get paid. I think that's to everyone's benefit, even if all of them aren't going to get paid by us.
And a little bit of fresh blood doesn't hurt. It just doesn't hurt. So I think a little bit of turnover on both sides of the ball, and I'm not talking about, a flashy wide receiver. I'm talking about, like I said, we're moving on from Tyler Kroft and bringing in some other veteran to replace Lee Smith, right? Sure. I mean, that's an exact example of what I'm talking about, where it's not going to impact your football too much, but it might impact the competition level of your roster, of your locker room, things like that. That's where Beane has to be right now. He's got to keep things at a high level. And complacency can set in, especially if this team has 11 wins, goes 2 rounds deep in the playoffs, and you don't want these guys falling back into it, old habits at this point.
No, obviously, when so much of your culture is built on that chips on shoulders and nobody believes in us, everybody's against us, that takes a certain approach and mechanism to continue to cultivate that. And they obviously know the kind of player that they're looking for to be able to build that. So, all right. So we've gone through some of the guys who are out there as far as, being re-upped, some of the guys there. So I think both of us are in a similar mindset that there's a number for Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson. We probably think that Brandon Beane's number is lower than what they're expecting. So we'll see where that shakes out. The 4 key names that are coming up here are the first ones that are coming up in this kind of group that were chosen by Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, whether in the draft or free agency, are the core pillars of this team and are going to be the real first test of what they've talked about of wanting to build from within, wanting to draft and re-sign your own. So we'll kind of go one by one. The first one is actually a free agent signing that has been an amazing value and one of the most underpaid players in the league and is now coming up here, but will be looking for his 3rd contract and his first significant contract, and that's Jordan Poyer. So Poyer is coming up on the end of his deal. He signed through the 2020 season, so we don't need to do anything this offseason, but he's coming up here very similar to what we just saw with Jerry Hughes and, good or not, Stephen Hauschka, in that they were both in their contract years, and that's the time that you do extensions. I think that they care. A lot of fans are asking, hey, no, re-sign these guys today. And I've explained that I think that they believe strongly in the principle of we don't negotiate 2 years early. When you're in your last year, that's when we talk, and you're going to get through the first phase of free agency. You have the little bit of window before the draft. That's when I would expect some of these things to come out, that they're ready to announce that in their last year. So let's start with Poyer. Because he's going to be going into the age 30 season there, I don't think we see as many years. I don't think he's in a position to command the Earl Thomas money and some of the other things that are out there. But, you look at some of the deals that Kevin Byard got, and you look at some of the deals that these other guys got, it's going to be a double-digit number. I'm guessing close to 12 million. I've heard some people hope that it's only 10. I was guessing maybe 3 years and 36 million. Is that crazy, or do you think that's the ballpark?
No, I think it's right. And you mentioned not wanting to negotiate 2 years out. There's no negotiating with the safety last offseason. I mean, you had 4 safeties completely reset that market in about a week and a half. So you weren't going to even answer the phone call if Jordan Poyer calls, if you're Brandon Beane, because clearly he's trying to bank off what happened to the whole position. I mean, Tyrann Mathieu goes from a prove-it 7-year deal to $14 million a year in a Kansas City defense that can't even afford him. So everything that could have happened right for a safety happened last year, and certainly Poyer is going to benefit from that. This is the Poyer and Hyde situation scares me a little bit, because I do feel like you're getting into that age where it starts to become an impact. They've been great together. I don't think you can break one or the other up. So I don't think you can let Poyer walk. And if that's the case, you sign him now. He's on the list of maybe 2 or 3 players Beane will sign this offseason. 12 is probably high, but it's probably the right number based on where the market has reset. It's going to be the 5th highest safety in all of football. Yeah. So to me, as long as you're in the top 5, you can probably sell it to a player, even though Poyer's been, arguably been a top 5 player for the last 2 seasons, right? I mean, Pro Bowl or both. It's going to be tough for him not to say, I'm younger than Earl Thomas, I'm better than Landon Collins, I'm better than production than Kevin Byard, who's at over $14 million a year. But I think you can probably settle in around 12 million.
That's what I'm hoping, is that again, I think they kind of have to be careful walking that line of, one, they use the leverage of, hey, nobody respects us, we don't get the credit up here in Buffalo, as a motivating factor, and then not to use it maybe negatively from a negotiating standpoint of, hey, you don't have any All-Pros, you don't have any Pro Bowls, because I think that comes off maybe a little disingenuous, but obviously some of those guys had a little more attention coming out when their deal was there. So again, I thought that was a number that shows respect. It shows that, hey, we value you as a top 5 guy. And obviously they've taken some dart throws here. We drafted Saran Neal, we drafted Jaquan Johnson. Yeah. They're kind of poking around that if they happen to strike gold, you have the luxury of walking on from one of those guys. It doesn't look like we've done that with those 2 players, but I would expect another one of those coming up here in the next draft, a mid-round, one of those extra 5th or 6th rounders will be another safety, and maybe we do strike on that one. And then when Hyde's contract comes up, maybe you walk there. But I think Poyer's one that has earned it. And again, this first wave, I think, is not only important from the, obviously roster construction and asset allocation. I think there's some indicative value of, this is how we're going to treat the guys who put in the work, that I think there's going to be a little bit of a message with these 4 names of how we want to show that if you come in, put in the work, we're going to take care of you here in Buffalo, and this is how it works. So I'm hopeful that's part of the case. I think that there's some of that message there. Yeah,
you definitely have to set a precedence that this is how we're going to treat our own, as long as treating our own means we can get a deal.
Yeah,
right?
Correct.
Because you're not giving Jordan Poyer a free agent contract, right? And if you are doing it a year early, even if it looks like a 3-year deal on paper, it's going to be a 2, right? You're really only tacking on 1 more year if you do this right. You know what I mean? You're giving him a bonus in 2020 in a year that already exists, yep, and then guaranteeing his 2021 salary. So it's going to look like a 3-year, $36, $38 million deal on paper, and you can even push that up to 40 if you have to make the headline better. But we know this is 2 years fully guaranteed, and we've got the cap to blow that. So, yeah. And it's a point I missed with Beane. He had those unrestricted free agents he signed last year. Many of those deals were front loaded, which is the right way to do it when you've got 50 million plus cap space to do it. You've got to get the bonus in now, get the salaries guaranteed early, and then give yourself options in years 3, 4, and 5. He did that with every single contract, including Mitch Morse. And you can certainly do that with a guy, a 31-year-old safety in Jordan Poyer, and make the next 2 years nice and good for him.
Yeah, I've been really impressed, especially as you go down and click through there and looking through, okay, if we needed to move on from somewhere, I'd say the only one that we didn't have a lot of flexibility in was Starr. But beyond that, every other kind, and again, I've been a big defender for that deal. I've been a big defender of his. Well, I mean, and it's not great. It's not great from the flexibility standpoint. I think he's a better player than fans give him crap for. Yeah. But I don't know that he's producing at a $10 million per year player, regardless of anyone's perspective. But the fact that we don't really have any choice, he's going to be on this roster through next year, no matter what, is just not aligned with literally every other deal that he signed. Every other deal, we're obviously not going to move on from Cole Beasley and John Brown, but we could if we wanted to. We can move on from Trent Murphy. We can move on from Tyler Kroft. We can move on from anyone else that we want to, because he gives us the out where if they produce, it's good value and we're happy. If they don't, we can move on with $1.8 million in dead cap, and it's nothing, and it's a easy choice to be able to make. Moving on to the next name that's here is one of my favorite players and what I think is one of the key cogs that's made this the modern pass defense that it is. The secondary gets a lot of attention, but Matt Milano is that modern NFL linebacker where he played safety in college, 6 foot 230, but still can, lay the wood when he needs to. 5th round pick, hasn't made any NFL money to this point of what people think about as pro athlete money, and is going to be looking at it. Again, has not had the attention that other guys have gotten. You see some of the deals there. Obviously, I'm hoping that everybody, throws away what the Jets did with CJ Mosley is completely out of left field, and that did not reset anything. So I'm hoping that they can get Matt Milano for 4 years and $44 million, around $11 million a year. And I think he's earned that. I think he's a critical piece to our defense. But how is that from a ballpark standpoint?
It might be a tad bit low. It might be a tad bit low, and here's why. I value him to Mark Barron.
Okay.
Who was essentially that converted safety to a linebacker role. He's kind of played everything, Jekyll and Hyde for the Rams team, and now on the Steelers as well, even into his 30s. So he locked in 5 for 45 back in 2016. That was $9 a year back then. So flash forward, $30 million in additional league cap and all that. You're probably going to have to go north of 12, probably 12 and a half to get him. But it doesn't have to be long-term. It certainly doesn't have to be long-term, because you're right. He's coming off of a 5th round draft contract where he made nothing. So you're not going to give him too big of a raise without him being happy with it. I think he'll be happy to take that deal.
Yeah.
I think he'll be happy to take a deal 4 for 48 around there. So similar to what you've projected here. I just think it's going to have to be a little bit higher, because again, I think that cap's going to increase 10 million more again. It's going to be approaching 200 million. So when you start thinking about things in percentage of cap, 40 million is going to be the quarterback model.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I should have brought this up a little bit earlier. All the numbers that we're throwing out there, I'm saying 4 years. Do you think this offseason we see a disproportionate amount of 2 and 3 year deals with guys trying to set them up to be coming back into free agency with the new CBA, banking that when Jeff Bezos throws $20 billion at the NFL, that they're going to be able to take advantage of that?
Yes, for sure. I mean, you probably see options built in. We've seen a lot more of it anyway. So you're going to see opt-outs or all those sort of things built in to protect the players and the agents should something drastic happen in the upcoming CBA. I don't think people are too scared of it, to be perfectly honest with you. It seems like talks are progressing, and all this wish list of things that I wish would change are never going to come to fruition anyway. Franchise tags aren't going anywhere. Maybe they increase in value. That's possible. But outside of that, look at the league cap is rising 10 million a year. As long as the contracts keep up and the notable positions have, we're about to talk about cornerbacks here. The cornerback is going to get reset.
Yeah. And
that's sort of the last piece of this puzzle. The tight end needs to get reset too, but I'm not super worried about that. I mean, George Kittle's going to get his money. You're going to see that happen sooner rather than later. But to me, it's about the cornerback. That's going to be the last piece of this puzzle. The safety was reset last year. The wide receiver had been reset the last 2 years. The quarterback is way up. And the left tackles are about to get reset with Laramie Tunsil as well. So there's going to be, it appears that everybody is being paid what the demand calls for versus the league cap increase. So I don't think you're going to see things shake up too much.
Yeah, I'm just curious where that comes in and how many guys are maybe having,
they're thinking about it.
Rose-colored glasses of what that payday could be coming up here. So we got 2 players left here. So one of them is, and they're at the 2 positions you just talked about. So one of them I think is maybe a step below that tier. We'll talk about Dion Dawkins first. So I don't think that he can, with a straight face, try to compare himself to Lane Johnson and the deal that Johnson just got. I don't think that he can pitch himself on par with Laramie Tunsil, but I think he's had a nice season. I think he's certainly, regardless of what the exact number is, he's made himself money this year. He has increased his value in the 12 games we've seen so far this year. So I'm hoping that doesn't get crazy, but a left tackle is a left tackle. So I was projecting that at 14 million, and that I don't know that Dion Dawkins is worth that, but I also don't know what your alternative is in going in to replace that. So I was very similar in that I thought Dion Dawkins and Cody Ford were both maybe all pro level guards who were being forced to play tackle. But with Dawkins' play this year, I've kind of reevaluated that and think that maybe it's more of a long-term option than I had initially thought. So do you think that's a spot where because of his play this year, he's earned a contract back? Or do you think that's one where maybe he's the one out of the four that I could see them kicking the can down the road, letting him play it out and dealing with it after the season?
I would guess Brandon Beane would love to sign him for $14 million a year. I don't think that plays. Here's why. I do think he's an all-pro guard. I do think if he was the left guard in this team, he'd be one of the best guards in football. And knowing that, that's how I would value him. And Brandon Scherf in Washington is about to get a contract worth $16 million a year. So if the highest paid guard of about the same age is going to make $16 million a year, and the highest paid left tackle is probably going to be north of $18 million after Tunzel's deal is done, then you probably can't justify any left tackle making 14, any starting left tackle with a prominent future. I mean, you're right. He could be the left tackle for the next 5 years. Yeah. So knowing that, I think you probably have to at least match Brandon Scherf's $16 million a year, and that's probably the starting point. They wait. They definitely wait because they have the luxury of being able to wait. They have to stagger things appropriately right now. We know Josh Allen's coming. Josh Allen's probably not going to be 2021, right? They're probably going to let it go 4 years, similar to a Jared Goff situation. Yeah. Let it go 4 years, and then if they like how that summer of the fourth year goes, they lock him in. So knowing that, you could do your big cornerback contract this year, you could do your big left tackle the year after, and then Josh Allen's the year after that. I like the ability to stagger the signing bonus structure in that regard.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I do think that out of these four, he's the one that's the most likely. You don't necessarily want to go down this path, but again, the flexibility he's given, you technically could ride out all of 2020 and franchise him in 2021 and deal with it again after that. So we haven't been a big user of the franchise tag to this standpoint, but it's an option that you have to be able to play with. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. And I agree. He's the one that if you get the right number, you're happy and you celebrate that. I would assume Dawkins' representative is going to be leery on that the same way that you were and looking for that right number. But that gives me a good sense of the ballpark there of where you're looking. The final name is, arguably the most talented player on the roster at maybe the second most valuable position in football right now. And like you said, is coming up at the same time. And I think very similarly to what you saw and you touched on with safety last year, I think that the representatives for Marlon Humphrey and Lattimore and Trey White are all going to be playing a game of chicken, waiting to see who signs on the dotted line first. Obviously you saw a handful of guys at that 15 and change million per year. I'm hoping that it's only 16 and a half or 17 and it doesn't go too crazy beyond there. Yeah. So I had hoped that they were going to pull a similar deal we've seen to some others where obviously the team is still going to exercise the 5th-year option. That's our right to be able to take advantage of that. That's a little bit of an ease into that 5th year that it looks like it's maybe 11 and a half. I'm not sure exactly how it'll play out in the spring, but that ballpark, maybe 12, depending on where it is. And then I had projected adding another 4 years and $66 million onto there at $16.5 million per year. Maybe that sneaks up to 17 and that's $68 million. But then something around the idea of 5 years and 78 to 80 million as the total deal when it's announced. How is that from a range standpoint?
Well, point number one is, and I already made it, is it's got to get done this year. Oh, yeah. In my opinion, it's got to get done. And the Bills should be the ones to reset the market. Don't wait for these other free agents. Don't get yourself in a situation where you're Landon Collins and the Redskins have to pay him way more than he's ever worth because of the other names that we mentioned getting signed in the safety position. Beane can be aggressive here. He's got all the cap to work with. He can front load. He can give a big bonus if he wants to go that route. I don't think he should go that route. I think he should guarantee big salaries instead because this is a player who's going to be durable and here for the next 3 or 4 years anyway. But look, this is easy, and it's you can just take the deal that they gave Stephon Gilmore in New England because it's the same player that you let walk. You essentially drafted the carbon copy of him 4 years later. You just take that big deal that nobody saw coming from the Patriots because they never do those deals, and you mimic it. Whatever the percentage of that is versus that league cap is, that was $13 million a year 2 years ago. So you're talking about, 10% more of that. So yeah, it's 16 and a half is probably the baseline based on that quick math in my head. My guess is it gets to 18, and I'm pretty firm about that number. I think that's where the cornerback market starts this offseason, but that starts with free agency. And I don't think the Bills should let it get to free agency. My point meaning, don't let these other guys who are about to walk into free agency set the market for you, right? If the Rams go and sign Jalen Ramsey, not that they have the cap space to do it, but they're going to try to sign Jalen Ramsey because they gave up the world to get him. That might be the barometer you use, right? If that gets done before Trey gets done, that's not going to be $18 million. The Rams can't do that. They physically can't do that right now with Jalen Ramsey because of the mess they've gotten themselves in with these other contracts. So whatever deal, maybe he comes in at 16 and a half. That's the number you then take with Tre'Davious White and say, we're going hard after you here. We're going to guarantee 3 full years of it. And we hope you're here for the next 5. But I agree with you. Your numbers are right from a baseline standpoint. That's where the Bills want to be for sure. I just think this cornerback market gets to 18 this offseason.
No, and I think you're right. And it's one of those areas where he's the first pick of this regime.
Yep.
He's their first investment. He has bought in every sense of the term. You have the Trey White Goalie Academy. You have him on every video. He has said all the right things. He was the player that they had the family video on Thanksgiving showing there with his kids and his wife. He has bought in every way that we're seeing from Josh Allen, all those right things that if you're going to make a statement that, hey, if we draft you in Buffalo and you play well, we will make you the highest paid player at your position if you've earned that.
Yeah.
That's the guy that you want to make that example of. He's been incredibly durable, incredibly healthy, has played really well, is at a position where you can afford to invest with less risk. No position in the NFL is injury-free. But if you're going to invest and assume that you're going to get the highest proportion of your games played back, corner's a spot to do that at.
Yes.
He's the exact guy I hope that they do that with. So I agree with you completely. I hope they're aggressive. I hope we hear it early in March that they exercise the option and tack on a huge chunk of money. And honestly, if it's an additional 4 years and 72, because they went all the way to 18 million and they announce it as 5 years and 84 million, I think it will send the right message that, if you come to Buffalo and play well, they're going to take care of you. And that's a guy that I think sends that message the right way, and that I'm not worried about that money not coming back to us.
Look, at $18 million a year against the projected cap next year of $199 is 9.5%. So you haven't hit the 10% mark with a defensive player, essentially is what you're saying, assuming they're not going to sign a Clowney or one of those big boys.
Yeah.
And then all you have to do after that is wait 2 years and double it with Josh Allen, right?
Yeah.
Because in 2 years, $36 million a year is going to be probably the 5th, 6th quarterback in the ranks. So that's what you're looking at right now. You're looking at 18 for White. You're probably looking at 16 for Dawkins, and then 36 for Allen, back-to-back years. And you can structure your cap around that conveniently because that's about the going rate for above average and not elite.
Absolutely. Well, and heck, look at what, in the same year that Allen's coming up here, there's a chance Tremaine Edmonds on the path to reset the middle linebacker market as well. And he legitimately is going to have the pedigree, the production, and the leverage to say that, no, he'll be that new version of Mosley's deal that will be ridiculous.
We need that Mosley deal to flame out pretty quickly. It's already started.
Yeah, it's correct.
Now.
Yeah, thankfully. Well, Mike, this was awesome, man. I really appreciate it. Again, the fans that are listening here and the guys in the chat know how much time I spend playing around with your numbers and how much I enjoy this. So this was a big treat for me, and you were everything that I was hoping for today. So I appreciate it. Before we sign off, tell the folks where they can find your podcast and maybe some of the upcoming work you have to be able to check out.
Yeah, we're at Spotrac on Twitter. So any questions or recommendations, hit me up there. We're doing a podcast twice a week now, every Monday and every Thursday on all the channels, all your Apples and your Googles and your Stitchers. And I've co-hosted with Kevin Sylvester and Paul Peck. So there's a lot of Buffalo roots to this podcast. So a bunch of the old vets. Work-wise, we're launching golf on Spotrac this week. So that's what's happening. That's what's new on Spotrac. We have 25 years of golf financial data coming. And then from an NFL standpoint, like I said, we've launched our first roster bubble, and we have an extension candidate piece coming out soon that will include Tre'Davious White.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it, guys. Anybody who's out here listening, check them out at Spotrac.com, at Spotrac on Twitter. Awesome to interact with. Always putting out news. That you guys are crazy how quick you're on top of things when things break, when announcements are out there and everything's coming. So really impressed with how quickly you turn things around, and one of my favorite follows. So thank you very much for your time tonight, Mike. Really appreciate it. Thank you guys in the chat. You guys were great. Really appreciate everybody's time tonight. You have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.